Hi everyone, welcome to our virtual event, MythBusters, dispelling the biggest myths about luminaire level lighting controls. My name is Angela Pylant and I'm a senior lighting specialist with Evergreen Consulting Group. And we're very excited to have you be joining us today, and we hope you are all staying safe and being healthy. So we have a lot of buzz about the benefits of luminaire level lighting controls, and a lot of myths as well about installation, operations, and the maintenance of this technology. So we're very excited we have two of our lighting experts here today to bust some of these myths and also answer some big questions that you may have. So with that, I want to introduce our two experts for this event who are ready to kick things off. Our first expert is Chris Meek. Chris is an associate professor of architecture at the University of Washington, and he's also a registered architect. He's the director of the Integrated Design Lab at the university's College of Built Environments and the Center for Integrated Design. We also have Chris Wolgamott joining us. He's a certified energy manager and a certified demand-side management professor who frequently presents on the future of lighting controls across the country. Chris also serves on the Next Generation Lighting Systems Connected Lighting Advisory Group. So together, they have more than 40 years experience in the lighting industry. So let's get started. Chris Meek and Chris Wolgamott are going to share a little bit of background on luminaire level lighting controls.
Great. Thank you, Angela. So first things first, what is luminaire level lighting controls? So shorthand is LLLC, rolls off the tongue, it's nice and easy. But on the screen is a definition from code. A lighting system consisting of one or more luminaires with embedded lighting control logic, occupancy, and ambient light sensors, wireless networking capabilities, and local override switching capable where required. So basically what we're talking about is fixtures that have a sensor that's integrated into this fixture that allows for multiple lighting and control capabilities. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see what some of those basic capabilities are. And those basic capabilities are occupancy sensing, daylight harvesting, continuous dimming, high-end trim, sometimes called task tuning, and control persistence. So I think most everybody's going to be aware of what occupancy sensing is and daylight sensing. High-end trim basically sets a level at the top end of the fixture that the light can no longer go to 100%. So when you tell the fixture that it's all on, instead of being at 100% on, maybe it's at 75% on. And then controls persistence is basically where if that fixture loses connectivity with other fixtures or with the server or whatever, that it doesn't go to an all-on mode or an energy inefficient mode. It reverts to its last energy efficient mode control programming, so that it always is in that, running in a space that is always in a controlled occupancy or daylighting system. So when a system, most of these systems have multiple advanced systems as well inside them. And some of that includes asset tracking, space utilization optimization, building integration, demand response, and plug load. I think the ones that we're seeing the most of today are the HVAC interaction and plug load. And that's using the sensors to help create better controls for other building loads, and using the sensors that are all over the place with the lighting in a space.
Thanks, Chris. So why would we want to use luminaire level lighting controls? So one of the primary drivers that we see is improved energy efficiency. So we see energy savings up to 75%. And that's from both the increased granularity of sensing and responding to spaces, and also for the customization capabilities, as Chris mentioned, with the high-end trim function. We also see their use because of interest in being able to reconfigure and reprogram the lighting system without having to add new control wiring. If you are in a situation where you're configuring a space and you want flexibility and quote unquote future proofing. We also see improved quality of light, where the controls response of the light fixture is more closely aligned with the location of the luminaire, and the potential for improved occupant control, really delivering a better user experience and improved productivity and comfort for users. We see improved simplicity of installation due to the wireless network capability and standard settings coming right out of the box, essentially pre-commissioned to standard user expectations. And then LLLCs inherently meet the most stringent energy codes via onboard sensing and occupancy and daylighting control for each fixture. So there are a lot of reasons why we would want to use luminaire level lighting controls in our buildings and projects.
Perfect. Thanks to you both. Let's move on to our myths. So the first myth that we have is all lighting has to have a sensor, which limits your fixture options. So Chris Wolgamont, can you tell us a little more about this myth and what you've heard?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that when we do a system like this, that we do have to have a sensor in every fixture. And I think what we're looking at when we do systems that are defined as luminaire level is that the general lighting has to have a sensor in every fixture. So in an office type setting, it would be all the 2x4s or 2x2s would be, have a sensor on it. But the expectation is not all the, decorative fixtures or wall washes or that kind of stuff, that those would all have a single sensor in them. We would love, to have those have a sensor that controls them, because typically in code there is some requirement of that, but it doesn't have to be per fixture. It can be a single sensor that controls multiple ones of those. And almost all the systems that are luminaire level have the capability of doing both. They have the integrated sensors for the general lighting fixtures, and then they have the standalone sensors that can work multiple fixtures at one time. And so that, I think, that's the thing that is out there right now, is that it in reality is a very combo system, but what we're wanting is the majority of the fixtures in that general space to have a sensor in every fixture to give that granularity and that view of the space to control the fixtures better.
Yeah, as Chris alluded to, there's a sense among some designers that using luminaire level lighting controls can limit your design creativity. And that's just not reality. If we look at the diagram that's on the screen right now, what we see is a series of fixtures in a general zone. We've got windows out at the perimeter at the right hand of the screen, 2 daylight zones, and then an interior zone. And throughout that general lighting area is a series of LLLC type fixtures grouped into 4 different control zones. And in reality, that's the space where the greatest control savings are. That's the space that's influenced by occupancy. It's the space that's influenced by daylight, as you can see by the 2 daylight zones. And that's where the benefit of luminaire level lighting controls really shines the most. But we also see a group of fixtures at the interior, group E, the circular fixtures. And those are decorative fixtures aimed at providing some pop and sizzle at the circulation zone, providing some wall washing and other effects. So the overarching takeaway of this is that you can use luminaire level lighting controls for your general lighting, get all the controls, energy savings, comfort benefits that go along with that, and still create a nice hierarchy of light with lots of flexibility in terms of your fixture types. And expression of lighting design and lighting various elements architecturally and spatially. So the notion that LLLCs are going to limit your creativity is just not accurate.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I think the other thing that's out there is the knowledge of how many systems are out there and how much product is actually out there. And then on the screen right now is the latest TLC list of qualified products that are Luminaire level qualified products from their list. And I mean, you can see there's a ton of them, and all the major manufacturers are on there, and every one of those has more than one fixture in it that is designed to have this. So there is 15 manufacturers, 19 systems, and hundreds of actual lights and luminaires that are out there that can be used in this. So you definitely have a wide choice of what you're going to be able to pick from. And every day, I think there's more that get on there from this list. So
that's excellent. So you can see we've busted myth number one. Both Chris's showed us that you can incorporate architectural fixtures. They don't need to have individual sensors while incorporating LLLC in our general fixtures. And there's a lot of product availability on the market, especially looking at that DLC list. So let's move on to myth number two. Lighting controls save a lot of energy, but can be annoying for occupants. So Chris Meek, let's start with you. How would you address this?
Yeah, so in my experience with working on energy efficiency and lighting, which is over 15 years, one of the consistent themes has been that a lot of energy savings control strategies can be annoying to occupants. And that's for a lot of reasons, but the LLLC technology are really well positioned to avoid a lot of the challenges that we've seen in the past. So historically, when we think about occupancy sensing, there's a sort of sense that the lights might go off when you need them on. We can imagine a person in an office building. If we go to the next slide, we see a cartoon, Dilbert cartoon that illustrates this. We've all been in a space or heard about an environment where suddenly the lights go off and somebody has to wave their arms to make the sensors see them, because it's positioned in a single location with poor visibility into the space or outdated technology that essentially results in false detection of vacancy and de-energizes the lights, leaving people in the dark. One of the great benefits of LLLCs is that given the granular nature of the sensing, it's virtually impossible for that condition to happen, because there's always a sensor very proximate to the people that are in the space, and the fixtures aren't going to de-energize when a person is directly underneath them. The other challenge is essentially associated with step daylighting systems, where all of a sudden there would be sufficient illuminance in the space, and the electric lighting, without warning you, without you putting in any input, suddenly de-energizes because there's sufficient daylight in the space. And from a specifications or performance standpoint, that might be exactly what the system should do based on the way it's programmed to operate. However, what's happened is your eyes have adjusted to the light levels in the space, and when the lighting de-energizes, even if it's meeting set point, it's going to perceive as dark. And that's because the human eye does not adjust as quickly as the sudden light reduction that happens for daylighting effects. And so one of the great things about LLLCs and LED lighting in generally is that virtually all the transitions in light levels that happen are really seamless due to smooth dimming capabilities, which operate essentially transparent to the occupant experience. So with LLLCs, you're going to see when the daylight is present or when occupancy is happening, you're going to get a smooth transition that's not jarring, that's not disruptive, and delivers a higher level of comfort to the occupants while still meeting all of the controls intent around daylighting and vacancy or high-end trim to deliver a great experience and meet the most aggressive energy savings goals. And furthermore, with LLCs, inherently there's a sensor at each fixture, which enables a really tight match between the light output and the condition immediately below the fixture, which is just fundamentally different than a large general multi-fixture zone where basically everything is happening in the whole zone according to a sensor in a single location. So I'm going to pass it on to Chris to talk a little bit more about context with between LLCs and network lighting controls.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think that, you did a great job of kind of going through that, and I don't have a lot to add, but I think that everybody that has been in a building and walked into one of the old, the controls that have been around since the 70s have walked into a building and seen the sensor with a piece of tape over it or disconnected or whatever, because the system just doesn't work the way the occupants want it to. The biggest difference between Luminaire Level and the network lighting controls in general and the the existing lighting controls that are out there is that granularity of the sensors and the fact that you can take it down to as granular as a single fixture on a zone, or however big a zone you want. But it allows you to have that that controllability. It allows you to have the spaces be more visually pleasing to the people that are working there, and that's a big deal that you haven't had in these other control systems for a long time. So I think that the other piece of that is that we're trying. Most of these things work out of the box this way. They're definitely programmable, and they're getting easier to program. A lot of them are programmed with your cell phone or with an iPad or whatever, so it makes it really easy to program them. The drag and drop type situation, depending on the system that you're using, but it allows you to have some flexibility as the day goes on and as time goes on, and that Chris mentioned future-proofing. It allows you to make some changes. It doesn't mean that every person gets control of their light. That's not what this is. What it means is that every light is controllable, and that's a big difference. But it definitely allows for the occupants to have a little more say in what their lights do based on their needs.
Excellent. So myth number 2 is busted. As we reviewed, these systems are really so much better than they have been in the past, and having that individual control, the sensing is really more attuned to occupants than it ever has been before. So let's move on to myth number 3. Luminaire level lighting controls are just too expensive and it's too big of an investment. So Chris Wogelmont, I'm sure you have heard about this myth when it comes to LLLC.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the things that's out there, and I think it's interesting because a lot of times when you're looking at this, it's one of the arguments people not selling the LLC use is that that's going to be more expensive for you, and you're not going to, mine's cheaper. And in reality, when you look at it, I think there's a lot of factors that go in that you have to take into account. I think the fixtures tend to be a little more expensive because they've got the sensor in it, but the install is cheaper. Especially if you're using a wired control system, you're saving a ton of time and energy and money on not having to run extra wire throughout the place. So it's one of those things that we're definitely going to talk about. I'm going to let Chris talk about some of the install advantages to this, and we'll go through why this is not right.
So there's a ton of advantages to LLLCs from a design perspective. And one of the biggest ones is really in identifying the control zones and locating the sensors. There's incredible simplicity to using LLLCs because each fixture is responsive to the immediate space beneath it. And that's really, really important from a controls zoning standpoint. I've worked with a lot of engineers and lighting designers, and we use rules of thumb for creating daylight zones. But in reality, the daylight zone changes across the day, across the season, across time, based on when blinds are in the position of blinds. And so the real benefit of LLCs is you don't have to identify which fixtures need to work together, because the control zones essentially create themselves based on the conditions within a space at any given point in time. And they respond to those changes in terms of changes maybe throughout the day for daylight, or changes in terms of the space from, you know, if they paint the space and there's new reflectances, or there's a new furniture layout, or as I said, as the patterns of daylight change across the year, the fixtures really, since they're granular, they just change as they need to for each sensor location. And you don't, a designer or an engineer doesn't have to identify a location of a single sensor for a zone that essentially has to kind of stand in as representative of the space, because a single location really can't represent all the changes that happen within a space during the day in terms of both vacancy and daylight and occupancy, et cetera. So you don't have to commit to one location. The control zone sort of just happens naturally because each fixture is operating independently. The other thing is we don't have to tie the fixture back to the system. There's no additional wiring and locating of that equipment, and we don't have to coordinate our control zones with power circuits. And since the wall switch is generally wireless in these systems, we don't have to run a switch leg down to a location. We can just put our wall switches wherever we need to, and they can connect wirelessly. Another really, really powerful advantage for LLLCs for designers is code compliance, since LLLCs have a dedicated pathway in code under the IECC 2018, which is the basis for most of the codes in the Pacific Northwest and other regions in the country. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Chris.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, you can see where there's, you know, cost savings in the design portion of it. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the cost savings that actually show up when you get to the install side. I think that the biggest thing, and we talked about it a little bit, is the wiring, but that is huge when it comes to labor. Everybody knows how expensive the electrician is to have them do the wiring pieces of some of this, to run 0 to 10 volt wires for the controls. We don't have that cost in this because all the controls are wireless. And there's no extra sensors that you're putting in with the LLC fixtures. They're already embedded into the fixture. You get them from the factory that way. So there's no, you know, cost to that. It's just putting the fixture in just like you would any other fixture. The programming of it, we're seeing that it's simpler to do it with the, you know, with the phones or the iPads or the laptops. Everything sort of connects up and it makes it work. And like Chris mentioned, a lot of times when you turn these on, they're already set up with energy efficient modes in place, and you know, you could literally turn them on and walk away and they're already going to sense daylight and they're going to sense occupancy, and you don't have to do anything to do any changes. So that, you know, the simplest of the designs is you just put them in and they turn on and they're ready to go. But if you do need to program them or group them or zone it, the doing of that is really quite simple with the applications that they put there. And you know, the nice thing is also is you can add to these at a later date. You can do small sections of your building and move on and do other pieces of this, and it just connects up with it in a relatively easy manner. Or as you move on, if you decide that your open space needs a few more closed offices, the reconfiguration piece is even more easy because you don't have to rewire stuff. You can, if you move the lights or don't move the lights, but you don't have to worry about the single sensor that's drawing multiple fixtures and having to rewire that or put a new sensor in, because you can disconnect and reconnect all the fixtures wirelessly and through the app. So I think that I'm going to let Chris talk a little bit about the investment side of this, and then I'll finish off a little bit as well.
So one of the things that we're seeing in recently is that there are a number of municipalities and other entities that are looking at incentives and even requirements for building energy performance improvements for existing buildings. And two recent examples of this are the voluntary tune-up accelerator deep energy retrofit program that the city of Seattle has just piloted, and the new House Bill 1257 in the state of Washington, which is mandating a certain level of existing building energy performance. And lighting retrofits are still one of the most cost-effective ways to meet these new standards, and they provide an opportunity to significantly improve the space quality and market position of an existing building while going through and making that investment in improved energy performance. So a great thing about Luminaire level lighting controls is that there's a really low barrier to getting started. You can do a handful of fixtures, try it out, see how it works, and then slowly make that investment over time, improving your facility and getting essentially a comprehensive controls retrofit as part of the upgrade improvement. We also could see Luminaire level lighting controls as an opportunity to make improvements in the building as tenant spaces changes or as leases roll over. So you don't have to buy a dedicated system. You can go in and make an improvement to an existing tenant space, make as it changes over, and as the leases roll, slowly upgrade your building over time. You don't have to commit to doing an entire building at once, as you might with a proprietary type lighting control system. We also see that there's lower risk and a smaller investment if you're simply looking to try it out and see how the system works in your particular application, or for your tenants, or for your building users. And the other benefit of LLLCs is if you have a space that is reconfigured frequently, or the tenants are rolling and there's a lot of turnover, LLLCs essentially provide inherent future proofing, because if you need to make a change, you can move it around and it doesn't require a large infrastructural investment to move or reconfigure your lighting. You can just go in and reprogram it, as Chris talked about.
Oh, great, thanks, Chris. I think I think people have heard of the 330-300 rule, or this one I like a little better, which is the 1990 rule. But basically, when we look at this and you're doing an investment in your building, you look at the more than just the energy savings, which in this particular one is the $1. So for every $100 that you spend on your space that you spend a month, $1 spent on energy, the electricity, the gas, the general services of the space. $9 is spent on the actual building itself, the workspace, the task, the building, your desk, your computers, that kind of stuff. But $90 is spent on the people that are working there. So whenever somebody's looking at this, we're looking at what do we do that gives us the most bang for our buck, but also benefits the most for our company. And I think that lighting is one of those places that is really easy. It's got great energy savings and it helps with that dollar mark, but it really can help with the $90 mark. If you could make that space better for your employee, that they're more comfortable, that they feel better to work there, then you get better work out of them. They don't call in sick as much. There's a lot of benefits that come with that. And so these type of systems help to give that $90 space some room, and you really do see some savings on that. And that's huge as you move through the company and what you're spending your money on every month. The other thing that you need to make sure, anytime you do any lighting job or any utility, incentives, or anytime you do any work when you're working with energy, is to talk to your local utility to find out if they've got an incentive for you. In the Northwest, there's some really, really amazing incentives right now for Luminaire level lighting controls. Anywhere from an additional $45 to $100 a fixture on top of what they're paying you for the fixture change out. So when you add up the incentives and you throw that into the fact that there's some pretty good savings in there on the energy use, and they're not really that much more expensive, in the end, it's possible that the luminaire level could be cheaper than a normal fixtures, without it or the normal controls.
Excellent. So myth number 3 is busted. As we discussed, the luminaire level lighting controls, they can be a big or small investment. So it's really what you want them to be. And we really highlighted those design and installation advantages and how they lower those upfront costs. So thanks to you both. Let's move on to our Q&A portion now. So we have several questions coming in from our chat here. So let's see. First question is, because they're wireless, are LLLCs difficult to program, and are they secure?
So I'll take the first swing at that. I think programming is, everybody's going down the path of trying to make them as simple as possible to program. So I don't think that that's an issue. Obviously, you do have to be a little tech savvy to be able to program them nowadays, because they're going to be on an app or something that's not as easy as a dip switch or something. But that actually is nice, because it allows you to have that flexibility and change stuff versus having, in an easy way, versus having to get up onto the ladder and get up and change the settings on each individual device. You can do it as a group or whatever. As for security, the biggest thing with this that I think if you talk to anybody that's doing these, the first thing they say is, if you've got a server that's got important information on it, don't tie outside stuff that's not important to that server. Keep them separate. And I think that if you do that and keep that in mind, then you're not going to have security issues that can arise if you let this connect up to your server and give somebody a doorway into the important information. So if you keep them separate, the worst that they can do is turn on and off your lights at any given time. But all of these systems meet UL security controls, and I work with the DLC a lot, and one of the things that they're putting on their new requirements to be on their list is new security protocols and keeping up with that. And so I think that, they're as secure as we can make them. Nothing's hack-free, but as long as you're smart about how you set these up, I don't think you have to worry about it.
Yeah, as Chris said, all of the manufacturers are working on improving the simplicity of the interface to engage with these system types. And I think in virtually all cases, a savvy building operator can learn how to reprogram and modify and adjust the system. But we see a number of manufacturers who provide that as a service for free as part of when you purchase their products. So that's one of the trends that we're starting to see in this space.
Okay, thank you. It looks like we have another question here. Could the use of smart TLEDs with associated controls transform a fluorescent luminaire into luminaire level lighting controls? Any comments on that?
I'll jump in first. So I think that it's interesting. I don't, there's nothing on the DLC list, which is where we mostly point to for what's luminaire level, that's not there right now. That doesn't mean there can't be a product that's there. My biggest worry on most of that is where the sensor is in the ability to make that control. And so if you've got a smart TLED that's got the sensor in the TLED, typically it's going to be behind, whether it's the lens or it's going to be behind the diffuser or whatever. And it's going to make it really hard for that sensor to be able to see and do what it's meant to do, right? It's going to be tough to see through that lens to get the occupancy or the correct daylighting. And so that leads to a few issues that as to whether or not it's going to function the way you want it to do. And if you don't want to have those complaints, then you might not want to move down the path of that. Doesn't mean that they can't get there, but I have not seen anything that I would say would meet luminaire level that is a smart TLED at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question here. Who would do the ongoing adjustments and management of a Luminaire level lighting control system? Would a facility manager do that, or would a person need training? And just as a follow-up on that, would the installer or commissioning person need to be brought in or consulted each time you wanted to make a change?
Obviously, the first time you do it, you're going to want to have some help, whether that's with the manufacturer or the installer. But I think the way these systems are set up is pretty simplistic in making those changes. I think one of the biggest keys is to put the password someplace. Because these are apps and they can be on your phone, is to make sure you know the password to the app to be able to make the changes. From what I've seen, typically somebody in the office, whether it's the maintenance guy for the building or the office manager, is the only one that has it on their phone to make those changes. You wouldn't give it to everybody on their, to be able to make changes to the lights. That would be a fun experiment to see how many battles and wars we had over where the lights changed and how often they changed. But I think in reality, it's just a single person or two in the building that have the ability to do that. But they're pretty simple in how they work. If you're able to play Candy Crush or some of those games, I think you can figure out how to make changes to these. So.
That's great. Another question that we have here is, what if you used one brand of Luminaire level lighting controls in one space and then another brand in a separate space? Would you have any potential compatibility issues?
I'll jump in on that. I think that the control side, yes, you probably would. But I also don't think that's a very normal thing that you would do. Very rarely, even today, do you put different control types or manufacturers in your space, right? I would highly, I haven't run into it very often if that's the case. Now, floors is a different story, right? Like if you had a whole building, you might have one control type company on one floor and a different control company on another floor, but not usually in the same space. But yeah, I do think that it could cause, there is some issues. So you have to be aware of what you're, when you're doing it, you want to be comfortable with the system. Typically, you're going to use the same system throughout the space as you upgrade, if you're upgrading it in stages. But I do think that you're okay with that. Now, that being said, there is a lot of work on interoperability between systems. And so we are moving forward where we can possibly see that thing solved, where you would be able to do that if you wanted to.
Okay, thank you. We have another question here. What would happen if a building's internet system went down?
So we touched on that's that control persistence thing. I think that what would happen is that obviously everybody's computers wouldn't work, but your lights would still continue to function in their last preset, whatever their settings were. It would continue to function in that way until it reconnected to the internet. And that's the way they're set up, and one of the reasons that burst control persistence is required as such, so that we don't lose the energy savings mode if something like that happens.
Thanks, Chris. Our last question is, can you speak to HVAC integration?
So I'll hit on that real quick. I think that we're in the process of looking at that there's a few systems that do it, some of the advanced systems that do that right now, but it's sort of new. They're working through that, and there's a lot of studies going on to figure out how that works. I think there's a lot of benefit to it, and I think there's a lot of possibilities that are going to help integrate these systems with LLC and the HVAC and plug load and many other building types, systems in there, that because it's the beauty of this is you've got sensors that are everywhere. right? They're in all the spaces and they cover the entire building. And so it gives you that granularity we talk about, not just for the lighting controls, but also for these other systems. You get more data and more view of the space than you ever have before because you've got sensors everywhere. So I think there's a lot of benefit to it, but it is definitely still in the infancy stage of how that works and how much savings we're seeing. But I think there's some really good possibilities with it as we move forward.
Yeah, and one of the things that I do is I look at control systems and use that as a tool to understand how buildings perform. And more and more building owners and designers and even occupants are interested in the way that their buildings perform and where energy use is going. And typically, the control system for the building's mechanical systems is a completely separate parallel system from the lighting controls. And from a building operations standpoint, and from a sort of data collection and transparency standpoint, having those two systems be operated by the same digital control system is really beneficial, both from an integration standpoint and a data basically just a building operation standpoint. It would simplify things. I think that's the direction we're headed. We're still there yet.
Thanks, Chris. Well, we're just about out of time here, so we want to thank everyone for joining us today, and a big thanks to Chris and Chris for providing their expert insights to us. We have a link on the page here if you want to learn more at betterbricks.com/LLLC. And thanks everyone for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your day.